All right, so I'll just get started. Um, so this is an eye toward the occult with me, your host, who shall remain nameless. So let's just get right into it. So what I want to talk about this time is answering objections to the occult. So I want to kind of, I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole, although I find that kind of thing super interesting. But I think here I just want to give an overview of, what I take to be some of the more challenging objections, or perhaps the more piercing objections that you might encounter if you were to, say, reveal your interest in the occult to someone. And I'll try and give a really good attempt at answering those objections. And I'm going to try and do that in a way that doesn't really presuppose anything else to be true. So, I'm not going to say, well, if you believe in angels, then it all really kind of makes sense. Or, well, if you think about it like you're living in the Matrix, then it all really makes sense. I'm going to try, if I can, to answer objections to the occult with sort of common sense reasoning or something like that. Now, naturally, the conclusions I'm going to reach by way of those common sense arguments are going to be a little counterintuitive, because in some sense, if there's anything to the occult truly, then then things then like metaphysically speaking, the world hangs together in a way which runs somewhat counter to our intuitions, or our intuitions today. So let's go for it. So the first really good objection, I think, to the occult, to the dark arts, to actually taking magic or some sort of form of ritual to really work in this radical way, not just in like placebo effect type way. But like if the claim on the table is like, no, there's at least some rituals or some practices that really work, quote unquote, and that kind of make miracles happen. Not really. I want to be clear that, the claim on the table is that basically you can kind of bend reality to your will or control it in a way that is not immediately obvious. But I don't necessarily want to say for now that like you have to believe in the supernatural, actually, or anything counter or against science or what have you. I don't really, like I said, I don't really want to take anything on board if I don't have to. So maybe I shouldn't have said miracles. Let's just say like, okay, the claim on the table is that there's some forms of magical practice or ritual which really work, quote unquote, right? Which cause effects in the world in this way, which is, markedly different than some of the ways we're used to, but which is, concrete nonetheless. So, you can get yourself money, right? Or help yourself, quit smoking through these practices. That's the claim, at least, is that, again, material change is possible through some of these practices. Okay. So I think the objection is like, well, why think that anything like that would work to begin with? Why waste any time on anything like this to begin with? Why take seriously Isaac Newton's interest in the occult? Why take seriously some, at least, of Crowley's system. Why give any credence, any default credence at all, to the notion that, so to speak, voodoo kind of works? There's a few things we could say here. So I'll try and just use sort of common sense reasoning, not to show that the objection is not, can be dismissed, but that at the very least, it's possible that the objection is misguided, or that it's possible that the objection, I'm going to try and lessen the force or the bite of some of these objections. So, okay, so what's the response? How do we answer this objection? That just sort of bottom line, bottom line, magic just isn't reasonable, and we shouldn't even, so we shouldn't even really have a discussion about it, say. Okay, well, so here's why a discussion of some of these mechanisms, at least, should be on the table. So first of all, it's not clear that we have much of an understanding of what we would call the common ways of manipulating the world. So when something, let's pick something really simple and really everyday, right? So when you think, I would like another sip of this glass of lemonade that I poured for myself, and you raise your arm to reach for the glass, right? So the thought there, I want to, reach for the glass, turns into the motion, right? This non-cognitive thing of the arm reaching for the glass. Now, any philosopher worth his salt, any scientist worth his salt, can tell you that in some significant sense, it's not clear that we fully understand what the ultimate metaphysical connection is between the mind and the body yet. And so even something ordinary like willing your hand to reach for the glass of lemonade is kind of mysterious and is in some sense a form of magic. I mean, if you see magic as basically an act of will sort of sent out into the world through some ritual process or some other means, and then the intended outcome sort of manifests or materializes in front of you. I mean, reaching, sort of thinking, willing your arm to reach for the glass of lemonade is a bit of magic, according to the very sort of universal definition of what magic is, which is sort of basically just imposing your will on the world. Okay, let's say. So basic things are according to this conception, forms of magic, and a rich if you can sit there and in this weird puddle of your consciousness kind of just make these movements of your mind, and then, this material effect is realized. And without you really understanding that process, you could call out to your friend and get this other mind to react to you and interact with you before you knew all the science behind all the processes that were involved in that action. So clearly we can will real effects into our experience and into our material experience without fully understanding what it is we're doing, but just knowing that it works. And so if it's open to us to think that there's anything at all to this free will notion, well, then we should think that, okay, well, maybe there's something to using the will in other ways. We know that, for instance, it goes beyond just reaching for the glass of lemonade, that you can go through these mental exercises, these mental movements, and bind the world in different ways, right? When you create a 5-year plan, a long-term plan, that's quite a sophisticated mental movement or exercise that you go through. And all of a sudden, your material experience is organized and brought together in this really harmonious way. So we have to admit that the the everyday things that we're committed to, in some sense, just commit us to the basic properties of the world and our experience, all the basic properties that are needed to put magic sort of back on the table. It's like, okay, well, what about ritual? What about, communal ritual? What about symbol and archetype? Is there something to the visualization processes? People make vision boards and whatever, and that really helps them get a clear sense of their goals. I mean, that sounds, again, everyday, but what I'm saying here, or suggesting, is that the everyday things tell us something really important about, how we might have to sort of check some of our intuitions a bit when it comes to just dismissing magic outright. Okay, so there's that. I hope at least I've done somewhat of an interesting job of responding to that. And then, okay, well, why think that something like ritual, for instance, or use of symbol magic, right, is going to bind the world in different ways? Well, I don't think we have to get too fancy there either. We can appeal to a lot of common sense psychological ideas and talk about your subconscious mind and the structure of your dreams, and again, maybe Jungian archetypes or something, and say, like, well, it actually makes a ton of sense to think that, you've got this conscious mind, sure, that maybe has this really modern, secular kind of way of categorizing its experience. But you've got this other part of your mind, which, for better or worse, is like 10,000 years old and is like, it's kind of like a collective mind or an evolutionary mind, right? The animal mind that really has this tribal structure built into it and is looking for that and looking for like mentors, right? Because it's got like the shaman figure kind of hardwired in there. I don't want to make too many claims. Again, all I'm suggesting is that it should at least be on the table that maybe simple rituals, symbol rituals or other rituals might actually have very interesting effects on the subconscious that could come to really empower a person in terms of what they're able to bring into their material experience. So, again, I actually think I'm trying to keep watering down this objection so that we can start to go, well, shoot, maybe we should at least look at some of this stuff, at least take an academic interest in these things or some of the more serious or long-standing traditions within the occult schools. Okay, well, why don't we go back and look at Kabbalah and say, okay, maybe there's more going on here than we thought. Maybe, they're not talking about what we thought. Maybe they're talking about structures of the subconscious mind. And there might be really interesting things that these peoples have learned, not just Jewish peoples, but, other peoples, other cultures. I think we have to kind of get over our own, I hate to say it, but like ethnocentric arrogance. It's like, yes, our science is incredibly powerful and useful, and it's like the best means we have of determining to the precisest degree what the truth really is. But I think it's high time that we started applying our sciences to some of these other bits and pieces of these cultures, and certainly the ones that we, when we do have a philosophical discussion about, okay, should these things even be on the table at all? Should we make any experimental, should we do any experimentally pioneering work on these things? Well, sure, I think we have every reason to. I think I just gave a bunch of reasons to at least think that this is something interesting to talk about. Maybe not crystals, maybe not tarot, maybe not astrology. It's not all going to be for everybody, but let's at least talk about maybe rituals and symbols in the subconscious mind. And I think maybe really start talking about what kind of experiments could we do to see what kind of interesting effects there are when you take a sort of weird hodgepodge modern patchwork approach to some of these ancient practices and wisdoms and things. And I think we can secularize these things and still powerfully imbue our lives with richness and depth and meaning, and a sense of real and true, again, empowerment is really what I'm after here, and freedom from constraint. And if there's any way in which any of these things can do that, I think we need to talk about that. And I absolutely think we can talk about that without doing away with any of our scientific commitments or secular commitments, really. We just have to kind of change, shift our background perspective just a bit. So that's probably more than enough for now, and I really do have to go, but more to come, for sure.